It began in the unforgiving vastness of the North African desert, a place so hostile that even the map seemed to fade into sand. Yet, in the late months of 1941, this wasteland became the birthplace of one of the most daring military units of the Second World War, the Special Air Service. Under the leadership of a young and unorthodox Scottish officer named David Stirling, a new form of warfare was about to be written, one built not on brute force but on stealth, deception, and audacity. The idea was almost suicidal in its simplicity. Instead of meeting Rommel's Afrika Korps in open battle, Stirling proposed striking at the very heart of the German war machine, their airfields, fuel depots, and supply lines, deep behind enemy lines. The British High Command was skeptical. The desert was merciless, communication unreliable, and intelligence sparse. But Stirling's conviction was unshakable. If we can destroy their aircraft on the ground, he argued, we can win the air war without ever taking to the skies. By November 1941, the Special Air Service, a name deliberately chosen to deceive German intelligence into thinking it was an existing paratroop division, conducted its first operation. The mission, codenamed Operation Squatter, aimed to parachute small teams into Axis-held territory and sabotage airfields in western Egypt. But almost immediately, disaster struck. A violent sandstorm scattered the aircraft and obliterated any chance of a coordinated landing. Parachutes tore in the wind, and men found themselves dropped miles from their intended targets. Out of the 55 men who took part, nearly half were captured or killed before reaching safety. For most units, such failure would have spelled the end. But for the SAS it was the beginning. Stirling refused to give up. With the help of the Long-Range Desert Group, an elite reconnaissance unit already operating in the Libyan desert, the SAS changed tactics. Instead of parachuting into danger, they would drive straight into it. Modified jeeps, stripped of armor but bristling with machine guns and jerry cans of fuel, became their new lifeline. In December 1941, the first successful raid was launched against the German airfield at Tamat, near Sirte. Under cover of darkness, Stirling's men navigated across hundreds of miles of open desert, guided only by stars and compass. They crawled onto the enemy airstrip with silenced pistols and time-delay explosives. Within minutes, the desert night erupted in a chorus of explosions as German aircraft, Heinkels, Junkers, and Messerschmitts, ignited in sequence, burning bright against the sand. An SAS trooper later wrote in his diary, "We counted 30 planes destroyed that night." The desert glowed orange. And when the last explosion faded, all that was left was silence and the wind. The raid's success was staggering. It crippled Luftwaffe operations in the region for weeks and forced Rommel to divert critical resources away from the front lines to guard his rear. For the first time, the Axis realized that the desert no longer belonged solely to them. But the cost of such operations was immense. The men operated on the edge of survival, exposed to searing heat by day and freezing cold by night. Every mission meant gambling not only with enemy fire but with the desert itself. A punctured radiator or a lost compass could mean death. Supplies were scarce, communication with headquarters was tenuous, and every man knew that capture often ended in execution. Yet, despite the odds, morale remained unbroken. The SAS thrived on the very danger that defined them. Stirling's methods earned him both admiration and suspicion. To the conventional commanders he was reckless, a rogue officer running an unsanctioned desert war. But to his men he was a visionary. They called him the Phantom Major, a nickname that spread even among the Germans who struggled to explain how entire airfields could be destroyed without warning. By early 1942, the SAS had destroyed more than 400 enemy aircraft, countless fuel depots and convoys. Each success emboldened them further, each raid pushing deeper into Axis-held territory. Their raids were not mere acts of sabotage, they were psychological warfare. German pilots began sleeping in their cockpits, fearful of what might come in the night. Still, behind every triumph lay a shadow of loss. The desert kept its secrets well. Many teams disappeared without trace, swallowed by sandstorms, intercepted by patrols, or lost to thirst. Their names remain etched on memorials, their final moments unknown. As Stirling himself once said, "In the desert, victory and death are often separated by a single mile." By the spring of 1942, the SAS had evolved from an experiment into a weapon, one that could strike anywhere, vanish without a trace, and leave confusion in its wake. But Stirling was already planning something far more ambitious, something that would test the limits of endurance and secrecy itself. It would be known as Operation Bigamy, a raid so bold that even the desert seemed to conspire against it. By the late summer of 1942, the sands of North Africa were shifting. The British Eighth Army was preparing for a renewed offensive against Rommel's Afrika Korps, and the Special Air Service, blooded, battered, and emboldened by their earlier successes, had become a secret weapon. Their reputation for striking unseen had spread across the desert. But their next mission would test not only their tactics but the very limits of survival itself. Codenamed Operation Bigamy, the plan was as audacious as it was perilous. A 1,600-mile raid deep into Axis-held Libya to strike the port of Benghazi, a vital hub for Rommel's supplies and communications. Led once again by David Stirling, the operation aimed to destroy aircraft, fuel depots, and docks, effectively choking off the German army's logistical lifeline. Supporting them were the seasoned drivers and navigators of the Long-Range Desert Group, LRDG, men who could cross the Sahara with the precision of seasoned sailors charting an open sea. On paper, it was a masterpiece of unconventional warfare. In reality, it was a march into a furnace. On September 11, 1942, a convoy of modified jeeps and trucks set out from Kufra Oasis, carrying 200 men, weapons, and enough supplies to sustain them for weeks in the desert. They moved by night, headlights covered, engines humming in low gear to avoid detection by German reconnaissance planes. The desert was silent, too silent. Unbeknownst to them, Axis intelligence had begun intercepting fragments of Allied communications. Somewhere along their route, the enemy was already waiting. 4 days they drove across dunes and rock fields, pushing both man and machine to breaking point. Tires shredded on sharp stones, engines overheated, and water supplies dwindled faster than expected. The men rationed every drop, wetting their lips with condensed moisture from engine radiators. The desert, one trooper later wrote, was not our battleground, it was our adversary. By the time the convoy neared Benghazi, disaster struck. German patrols had tightened their perimeter. A Luftwaffe reconnaissance plane spotted dust clouds moving unnaturally across the desert floor. Within hours, radio chatter crackled through Axis frequencies. The British raiders were coming. Rommel's men moved swiftly, deploying armored cars to intercept. The SAS pressed forward, hoping speed and confusion would carry them through. But the element of surprise, their most valuable weapon, was gone. Near the remote coastal outpost of Jallo, Stirling's convoy was ambushed. Machine gun fire ripped through the still air. Vehicles exploded, flames licking the night sky. Amid the chaos, Stirling ordered an immediate withdrawal. There would be no glory in Benghazi, only survival. The retreat was a nightmare. The men scattered in small groups, attempting to regroup at prearranged desert rendezvous points. Navigation became guesswork as sandstorms rolled in, erasing tracks and landmarks alike. Fuel ran out and vehicles were abandoned one by one. Some men marched for days without food or water, guided only by the stars. Others vanished without a trace, swallowed by the desert's vast indifference. The LRDG, stationed hundreds of miles away, received fragmented reports, faint Morse code signals from dying radios. Rescue patrols set out, but found only burnt-out jeeps and the occasional set of tracks disappearing into endless sand. The desert is a thief, an LRDG officer later said. It steals men and gives back nothing. Of the original force that set out for Benghazi, dozens were missing. Some were captured by Italian patrols and sent to POW camps. Others perished from exhaustion and exposure. Only a fraction made it back to Allied lines. Operation Bigamy had failed, but it was not forgotten. The mission's aftermath raised hard questions. Had the plan been too ambitious? Had Stirling underestimated the enemy's awareness? Or had someone, perhaps unknowingly, betrayed the route? The records remain inconclusive. Even decades later, fragments of rusted vehicles and bones have been found drifting beneath the dunes, silent witnesses to a mission lost to time. Yet, in failure, the SAS learned. The operation exposed the limits of long-range desert warfare and the importance of stealth, intelligence, and timing. Stirling's debrief emphasized that small, surgical strikes, not grand offensives, were the key to success behind enemy lines. The SAS would adapt, evolve, and become deadlier than ever. In early 1943, as the war in North Africa drew toward its end, the SAS began preparing for a new theater of operations, one colder, darker, and infinitely more dangerous. The deserts would be replaced by forests and farmlands. The targets, no longer airfields but train lines and German convoys. Europe was waiting. And in its heartland, the shadows of the SAS were about to fall once more. By the spring of 1944, the North African sun had set on the Special Air Service. Their jeeps, once blazing through the desert like ghosts, were now crated and shipped to a new front, occupied Europe. Operation Overlord was imminent, and for the SAS, the battleground would no longer be open dunes but the claustrophobic forests and villages of Nazi-controlled France. This time, their mission was not to destroy aircraft, but to sow chaos in the very heart of the Reich's occupied territories. The plan was precise yet perilous. In the weeks leading up to D-Day, small SAS units would parachute behind enemy lines to sabotage railways, ambush convoys, and rally the local resistance. These operations, codenamed Houndsworth, Bullbasket, and Gain, were essential to ensure German reinforcements couldn't reach the beaches of Normandy once the invasion began. The enemy's strength lay in its mobility, and the SAS were determined to cripple it. On the night of June 5, 1944, as Allied bombers thundered overhead en route to Normandy, small black silhouettes drifted silently through the clouds above central France. Among them was Major Bill Fraser, leading the Houndsworth detachment, 40 men of 1st SS, armed with Sten guns, explosives, and a sense of grim determination. They landed in the Morvan forest near Dijon, a region known for its dense woodlands and the fierce loyalty of its Maquis resistance fighters. Their first task: establish a base, link up with local resistance, and begin cutting German supply lines. Within days, they were ambushing convoys, blowing up railway tracks, and vanishing before the enemy could react. One SAS trooper later recalled, "We operated like ghosts. We'd strike at dawn, melt into the trees by noon, and by nightfall, the Germans would be chasing shadows." Meanwhile, to the southwest near Poitiers, Operation Bullbasket unfolded under the command of Major John Tonkin. His men parachuted into the Vienne region to disrupt reinforcements heading north toward the Normandy front. They established hidden camps in the forests, camouflaging tents with foliage and burying supplies. Working closely with the French resistance, they ambushed fuel trains, attacked convoys, and destroyed locomotives carrying panzer divisions. The results were devastating for German logistics, but the cost of success was about to be catastrophic. By early July, German intelligence began to piece together reports of British paratroopers operating with the Maquis. The Gestapo and SS units were dispatched to hunt them down. On July 3, 1944, their luck ran out. An informant betrayed the location of the Bullbasket camp near Verrières. Before dawn, German armored vehicles surrounded the forest. The SS, outnumbered and outgunned, fought desperately to break free. Some escaped into the woods, but many were captured, including Major Tonkin himself. What followed remains one of the darkest chapters in SAS history. 54 captured SAS men, along with several French resistance members, were executed by firing squad near the village of Saint-Sauvant. Their bodies were buried in a shallow mass grave, discovered only months later. The execution was in direct violation of the Geneva Convention, yet it reflected the fear the SAS had instilled in the enemy. The Germans viewed them not as soldiers, but as assassins, shadows that struck without warning. Despite this tragedy, the missions achieved their strategic goal. Railway sabotage and ambushes delayed key reinforcements by critical days, buying time for Allied forces pushing inland from Normandy. The effectiveness of these small teams, often no more than a dozen men, reshaped how modern armies viewed special operations. As one Allied commander later noted, "A few men with courage and explosives can do what entire battalions cannot." Still, the cost of these victories weighed heavily. The men who survived carried the burden of lost comrades and unmarked graves. Many missions went unreported, names omitted from official dispatches for security reasons. Even decades later, some files on these operations remained classified, containing reports of agents and informants whose identities were never revealed. The SAS transition from the open desert to occupied Europe was not merely a change of scenery, it was a transformation of warfare itself. They became invisible saboteurs, fighting in a world of deception and terror, where every knock at the door could mean discovery and death. Each mission blurred the line between soldier and spy. As the Allied front lines pushed eastward, new missions were planned, deeper into the heart of Nazi-occupied territory. The SAS was about to enter the rugged Vosges mountains of eastern France, where a new operation would take shape, one that would end not in victory but in silence. Its name was Operation Leuton, and it would haunt the SAS for years to come. Autumn 1944. The Allies were advancing through France, but the war was far from over. The German army, though battered, still clung to the eastern strongholds with brutal determination. In the dense, fog-shrouded Vosges mountains of northeastern France, the Special Air Service was once again called upon to operate behind enemy lines, in a mission that would test not only their skill, but their endurance against isolation, betrayal, and the overwhelming power of an enemy fighting to the last breath. This was Operation Leuton. The 2nd SAS Regiment, under the command of Major Roy Farren, was tasked with parachuting into the Vosges to support the French resistance, disrupt German communications, and gather intelligence on enemy movements toward the Rhine. The operation's codename Leuton was chosen for secrecy. The location, near the small village of Moussy, a remote valley surrounded by steep forested hills, where mist clung to the pines like smoke from a dying fire. On the night of August 12, 1944, the first team dropped into the dark canopy. Parachutes barely brushed treetops before the men hit the forest floor. Their radios crackled to life, contact made, mission underway. Over the following nights, more SAS teams landed, bringing their strength to around 90 men, along with French SAS volunteers and members of the local maquis. The villagers, at great risk, provided food and shelter. They knew the stakes. Discovery meant execution, not imprisonment. The mission's objectives were ambitious. The SAS were to coordinate local resistance efforts, monitor German troop movements withdrawing from the front, and prepare for a possible Allied breakthrough into the Rhine Valley. Using small patrols, they ambushed convoys and blew up supply trucks along mountain roads. One team, operating under Sergeant John Wiseman, attacked a column of German vehicles near Sienens, their ambush so sudden that it left the enemy stunned, scattering into the forest in panic. For a time, the operation seemed to succeed. But by late September, something changed. The Allies advanced toward the Vosges stalled, and the SAS realized they were now deep inside enemy-held territory with no immediate prospect of relief. The Germans, led by the 17th SS Panzer Grenadier Division, began sweeping the mountains in force. They were relentless, using local informants and captured resistance fighters to pinpoint SAS positions. Farren's men were suddenly the hunted, surrounded, outnumbered, and running low on supplies. Radio contact with London grew sporadic. The last clear message sent from the field read, "Running out of ammunition. Still operating. Situation critical." Then silence. By early October, the Germans had encircled Moussy. Villagers were rounded up and interrogated. Some were deported to concentration camps, accused of aiding the British. Those SAS men who remained tried to escape west, breaking into small groups to avoid detection. Some succeeded. Others vanished into the woods, never to be seen again. 4 weeks afterward, rumors spread among the resistance. Captured SAS men were being executed in secret. Post-war investigations confirmed the grim truth. At least 31 members of the SAS and the French maquis were executed by the Gestapo near Gaggenau and Strasbourg. Among them was Captain Henry Druce, one of Farren's most trusted officers, shot after refusing to betray his comrades. Their bodies were buried in unmarked graves, their fate unknown until after Germany's surrender. Major Farren himself escaped, evading capture by disguising himself as a French laborer and trekking across occupied territory. In his memoirs he recalled, "The forest swallowed our voices. We moved in darkness, and when dawn came, it found only the dead." Operation Leuton was a tactical failure, but its legacy became a defining moment for the SAS. It revealed both the courage and the cost of deep cover missions. The men fought not just the enemy but starvation, exhaustion, and the psychological torment of isolation. In many ways, it symbolized the very essence of the SAS creed, to dare and if necessary to die in the shadows. In the years following the war, the fate of the missing men remained a haunting mystery. Families waited for news that never came. It wasn't until 1946 that British investigators uncovered mass graves in the Black Forest region, confirming the fate of those who had vanished. The discovery brought closure but also left lingering questions. How much had German intelligence known, and had there been a leak from within the French resistance networks? Even now, historians continue to piece together fragments of evidence, intercepted radio logs, German field reports, witness accounts, to reconstruct the final days of Operation Leuton. What remains clear is that the operation exposed the thin line between bravery and tragedy, between secrecy and sacrifice. For the SAS, the Vosges were a crucible. Those who survived carried the memory of Moussy and its people with them for life. The operation hardened the regiment, forging a brotherhood that would endure long after the guns fell silent. But the war was not over. In Italy, new orders were already being drawn. Another raid awaited, one cloaked in deception, daring, and disguise. It would be known as Operation Tombola. Italy, March 1945. The war in Europe was entering its final, violent months. The German front was collapsing, yet their defenses across the Apennine Mountains, the Gothic Line, remained formidable. Amid snow-dusted ridges and ancient hilltop villages, A small band of Special Air Service soldiers prepared to carry out one of the most audacious raids of the entire war. It would strike at the very heart of the Wehrmacht's command, and it would become legend. This was Operation Tombola. The mission's conception was simple in theory but daring in execution. A joint British-Italian partisan assault on a German divisional headquarters situated near the town of Bodig di Albinia, just north of the Apennines. Intelligence reports indicated that the building housed senior officers of the 14th Army, the same force delaying the Allied advance into northern Italy. Eliminating those officers could paralyze German command in the region, if only for a few days, just long enough to shift the balance. The man chosen to lead the operation was Major Roy Farren, the same battle-hardened officer who had escaped the slaughter of Operation Leuton months earlier. His orders were blunt: infiltrate the headquarters, eliminate key personnel, and destroy communication equipment. But Farren was a soldier shaped by loss. This mission, he decided, would be conducted on his own terms. His force was a patchwork of nations and identities: 2nd SAS troopers, Italian partisans, and escaped Russian POWs. They were joined by a peculiar figure who quickly became the heart of the team: Captain Michael Lees, a British SOE agent known for his defiance of authority and his penchant for improvisation. Together they would plan a raid that defied every conventional rule of warfare. Disguises were key. Using captured German uniforms, the SAS and partisans blended into the enemy's world. Their jeeps were painted with Wehrmacht markings, their weapons reconfigured to resemble those of the enemy. To anyone glancing from a distance, they were simply another German patrol moving through the hills. Every detail mattered. A misplaced insignia could mean instant death if discovered. On the evening of March 26, 1945, under a sliver of moonlight, the strike force assembled in the woods near the village of Albinia. Locals recalled hearing distant murmurs in multiple languages: English, Italian, and Russian, punctuated by the soft click of weapons being loaded. The tension was electric. Farren gave the order: "We go in silent, we leave in thunder." As they approached the villa housing the German headquarters, they could see light seeping through the windows. Inside, officers of the 14th Army were dining, unaware that death was creeping through the olive groves outside. Farren's men surrounded the compound, each team assigned to specific targets: the communications room, the vehicle park, and the officers' mess. At precisely 2 a.m., the first explosions shattered the quiet. Grenades tore through the main hall as SAS troopers stormed the building, submachine guns blazing. The air filled with smoke, shouting, and the crack of gunfire. Within minutes, chaos reigned. Several senior German officers were killed instantly, including the divisional chief of staff. Farren himself led a small team into the radio room, destroying the communication equipment with thermite charges. The entire engagement lasted less than 20 minutes. By the time German reinforcements arrived, the attackers were gone, swallowed by the hills. Behind them, the villa burned fiercely, a signal fire marking one of the last great commando raids of the war. The SAS had achieved complete tactical surprise, inflicting heavy casualties and crippling local command operations. But even success came with a price. In the aftermath, German reprisals were swift and merciless. Villages suspected of aiding the raiders were searched, and several civilians were executed. For the partisans, it was a grim reminder that every act of resistance carried a terrible cost. Yet, despite the bloodshed, the operation's impact was undeniable. The temporary collapse of German coordination allowed Allied forces to advance through the Apennines, hastening the fall of northern Italy. Major Farren's after-action report was characteristically understated. Objective accomplished. Enemy leadership neutralized. Heavy damage inflicted. All units withdrawn. What it didn't say was that the mission had been conducted under almost impossible conditions, and that many who fought in it would never be officially recognized. One of the most remarkable details of Operation Tombola emerged only decades later. The raid was accompanied by a bagpiper. David Kirkpatrick, known by the nickname Mad Piper, played his pipes as the SAS attacked, a surreal echo of Scotland's ancient warrior traditions. His music, wild, defiant, echoing through the hills, was the last thing many Germans heard that night. The raid's legend grew in the years that followed. Farren would later describe it as the perfect marriage of chaos and courage. Historians have since called it the last great commando raid of the Second World War, a symbol of how unconventional warfare could achieve what larger armies could not. When dawn broke over the Apennines, the villa was still burning. Smoke curled upward, visible for miles, a final message to an empire already collapsing. The SAS, their mission complete, slipped back across the lines, leaving nothing but ashes, shell casings, and questions. But the war's end did not mean the end of their work. There were still prisoners to liberate, intelligence to secure, and fugitives to hunt. In the final weeks of the conflict, the SAS would turn from raiders to rescuers, a shift that would bring them face to face with the hidden aftermath of the war they had fought in the shadows. April 1945. The war in Europe was drawing to its brutal conclusion. Allied armies pressed in from the west, the Soviets thundered from the east, and the Third Reich began to unravel. Yet even as victory neared, there was no peace for the men of the Special Air Service. Their mission was far from over. In the chaos of collapsing Germany, a new objective emerged, one built not on destruction, but on liberation, pursuit, and the unveiling of secrets buried by war. In the final months, the SAS role shifted dramatically. No longer raiding airfields or ambushing convoys, they were now tasked with racing ahead of the advancing Allied front lines, to rescue Allied prisoners, intercept fleeing Nazi officials, and prevent the destruction of key intelligence sites. The same skills that had made them masters of sabotage were now vital in hunting down those trying to vanish into the fog of defeat. Among these missions, few were as remarkable as the liberation of the POW camps across occupied Europe. SS patrols, often driving deep into enemy territory before the main army, discovered horrors that defied belief. In northern Italy, teams from the 2nd SAS found camps hastily abandoned, prisoners left starving in their bunks. One report from a patrol near Medina described dozens of men in rags, eyes sunken, too weak to speak but still able to salute. These scenes were seared into the memories of the men who had spent years striking from the shadows, now forced to confront the human cost of the war's hidden front. But even as they rescued others, the SAS continued to operate with the same deadly precision that had defined their wartime legacy. One of their final operations, Operation Amherst, launched in April 1945 in the Netherlands, saw SAS paratroopers dropped into Drenthe province to secure bridges and cut off retreating German units. Parachuting into flooded fields under heavy fire, the men faced desperate resistance from SS troops and pro-Nazi Dutch forces. Despite heavy casualties, they held their ground for days, preventing enemy reinforcements from reaching the northern front. Local Dutch civilians later called them the ghosts of the sky, men who appeared in the night to bring freedom. In Germany itself, SAS units hunted Nazi officers attempting to escape justice. These operations, often shrouded in secrecy, brought the regiment into direct contact with some of the war's most wanted figures. In Bavaria, one patrol captured an SS intelligence officer carrying documents detailing the evacuation of gold, art, and classified materials, evidence that would later feed into the famous investigations of Nazi treasure caches and the Alpine Redoubt. The details remain partly classified even today, but fragments suggest the SAS may have intercepted convoys carrying sensitive materials intended for destruction or concealment. Amid this chaos, the cost of 5 years of constant warfare was evident. Many SAS veterans had spent months, even years, behind enemy lines. They had seen comrades vanish without trace, had buried friends in unmarked graves, and carried scars that no metal could erase. Their final missions were not acts of glory but of duty, to bring home those who could still be saved, and to uncover truths that others sought to bury. One such mission took place near Innsbruck, Austria, in late April 1945. Intelligence suggested a convoy of high-ranking SS officers was fleeing toward the mountains. A small SAS patrol intercepted them near a mountain pass. After a brief, violent skirmish, the officers were captured. Among them, a man carrying orders signed by Himmler himself, instructing the destruction of Allied prisoners in the event of defeat. The patrol's intervention saved hundreds of lives. It was a quiet victory, one that would never make headlines, yet it embodied the SAS creed to the end: who dares wins. By May 1945, as Germany surrendered and the guns finally fell silent, the SAS began the long process of disbandment. Many of its men faded back into civilian life, carrying memories too heavy to share. Others remained in secret service, their wartime experiences shaping the intelligence operations of the Cold War. Their raids, from the deserts of North Africa to the forests of France and the mountains of Italy, had not only changed the outcome of battles but had redefined modern warfare itself. Still, mysteries lingered. Files disappeared, missions remained unacknowledged, and questions persisted about lost men and secret recoveries during the war's closing days. The sands of the desert, the forests of France, and the Alps of Italy still held their secrets, the silent witnesses to a war fought in the shadows. The story of the SAS in the Second World War was not one of glory alone, but of courage paid for in blood and silence. Their legacy was not carved in marble memorials but written in the hidden margins of military history, in coded reports, unmarked graves, and the faint echo of engines that once carried them behind enemy lines. And though their war ended in 1945, the spirit of their daring endured. The lessons they wrote in the language of risk and sacrifice became the doctrine of every modern special force that followed. The SAS, born in the deserts, tested in Europe, and tempered in secrecy, had forever changed the face of warfare. Because in every mission, every raid, and every act of silent heroism, they proved a simple truth, that in the darkest moments of history, those who dare win.